Hey, it's your girl Sayala. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having the best day. Today we're going to take a look at day 6 of the development updates for Pantheon with a focus on how the skills and how techniques will evolve in the spring 2026 update. Before we jump into things, if you find my content helpful, please consider smashing that like button and subscribing to my channel for future content. You can also find me live on Twitch from Monday to Friday around 7:30 p.m. Eastern. All right, let's get into it. So, combat and progression update details part 6, skills and the evolution of techniques. Let's see what they're talking about in this update. We spent last week deep diving into many of the upcoming changes to Pantheon's combat system, but there's still an equally important category of upcoming changes we wanted to focus on this week: character progression. Currently in Pantheon, most of our character progression is the form of vertical power growth through levels of equipment upgrades. This week, we'll focus on the ways we are broadening how players can develop their characters, starting with player skills. Changes to character skills. As of today, character skills in Pantheon feel weightless and underutilized. While your skills have an impact, they reach their cap very quickly each level, especially combat skills, and the impact of your skills is vastly overshadowed by your level and/or your equipment. As such, there is little incentive to pay attention to your skills when seeking to progress your character. Our goal in the upcoming combat and progression update is to make your skill progression more of a mainline part of your character's journey. Skill points should feel weightier. There should be more decision points related to skill progression, and more time should be required to invest in the skills you really want to master. That's an interesting statement. Curious to see what they mean by that. Let's take a look at the details. Here are some of the ways we'll be accomplishing this. All skills will cap at 5 points per level instead of 3. Okay, that's fine. Fair. The rate of skill gain will be slower. Getting a skill to its cap will require you to intentionally focus on using that skill in many cases. I mean, that kind of feels like the direction EQ kind of had, where it was a little bit slower. But really, if you cast the spells or use the weapon or whatever the skill happens to be, it should just innately skill up by the time you get to your next level. Now, what I will have an issue with them saying this is that in yesterday's update, if you recall, they said that leveling is going to be a little bit quicker. So if they slow the skill gain too slow, where you're leveling faster than you are capping those points out per level, then I'll have an issue with that. But I would hope that that's not going to be the case. But we'll have to wait and see. All that really does is people sitting on test dummies to level up those skills, which, in my opinion, is an unnecessary thing to have to do, but we'll see how it plays out. To give weapon skills more impact, having a high skill, a specific weapon type will not only improve your chances to hit the opponents at all levels, it will also grant bonus damage to your attacks when using that weapon. I mean, that sounds great in theory. My only concern with this one is how is that going to translate for casters? So it's great that melee are going to get bonus damage from their attacks, but will casters get the same thing if our spell skills are higher? They don't really say that. The only reason I'm concerned about this is a person that primarily plays a caster. This could give an advantage to melee classes having extra damage, whereas casters may not necessarily get that benefit because we don't really melee. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. The techniques you can learn will be based on skills with specific weapons. Examples: swords, axes, daggers, etc., rather than a damage type, slashing, crushing, etc. Yeah, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. Well, I don't know. I guess it's kind of similar to other games where you had abilities that were tied to a certain weapon type. I just, again, from a caster perspective, not sure how that works. If we'll have to wear will our techniques change based on the weapon we have equipped? I don't know. That's an interesting one. Curious to see how that one plays out. Additional skills will be added or adjusted to represent other areas where your character might learn and improve over time. For example, the shield skill will be updated to directly improve your chance to block attacks with an equipped shield as the shield skill increases. This is in addition to the shield's stats. Yeah, that one's not bad. I think that's good for tanks. I mean, there's a few non-tanks that would wear a shield, so that's not a bad thing. I don't have an issue with that. Skills will play a major role in the mastery system. A wizard will need certain amounts of conjuration skill to unlock parts of their mastery progression, while a rogue will need to continue improving their tricks of the trade skill to unlock more of their own. I don't have an issue with this per se, and it sounds great. My only concern, and it's not really concern, more feedback, is that these skills you should innately max out as you play the game anyway. So does this really add any additional level to the game? It brings me back to my previous point where they said they're going to slow down how fast these level. But if the intent is to, if you play the game and cast those spells, theoretically, you would expect to have those capped out by the time you get to your next level. So are these really, is it more just wordplay, or does this actually matter? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Again, it's going to depend how slow they really slow that down. But one would expect, based on playing other games that have these type of skills, that you would expect to at least get 5 skill ups in the time you go from one skill or one level to the next. But I don't know what they have in mind for how fast that's going to be, so we'll have to wait and see. The goal of these changes is twofold. First, offloading some character power away from gear over to skills helps us balance itemization and create more interesting itemization overall. I don't disagree with that, but again, the stuff they touched on with regards to weapons was more melee-centric. I don't know how that will correspond to casters or healers from that perspective, but we'll see. It's a little vague, but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Second, by recalibrating the power that comes from leveling up to include more power contribution from skills, it allows for a degree of horizontal progression to our player characters. When the item just won't drop, or you can't put the group together to finish out the level, skill progression will now be an additional avenue for growth. Not to mention, when mastery comes into play, more info in our next dev diary, the skills players choose to master will give them ways to distinguish themselves from others playing the same class. Yes and no. The only thing I see from them saying that it's horizontal progression and you're working on skill progression, I mean, you can solo to do that, but if you're a class that is struggling to solo, you're going to end up sitting on a test dummy to level up those skills, is what I see from that. Maybe I'll be wrong, but if I want, so I'll use the last patch that came out. Prior to the last patch, our wizard roots weren't really attached to a skill. When they put the last patch out, I forget what the name of it is offhand, but it was attached to a new skill type, and it was 1 out of whatever the cap was for your given level. So what I did to level it up was just go sit on a test dummy and spam the spell over and over and over to skill it up. So when they talk about skill progression from this point of view, that's kind of what I think of. Maybe they have something in mind for that that's not being discussed here, but that's what I would do. That's what I know a lot of other players currently do. So I don't see what that additional skill progression is going to really give to the game, but I could be wrong. That's just my opinion, and we will see again how that plays out when it comes out in the spring. If you have any thoughts on any of this or disagree, feel free to leave comments on this video, and we can chat more about it, or come to my stream. We can chat about it there too. Evolving techniques. Our technique system is intended to instill the feeling that as you become more skilled with a weapon, you should be able to wield it more effectively in combat. Anyone can swing a mace, but a skilled mace user should be able to use it to deflect blows, stagger opponents, and potentially turn the tide of a battle. As many of you know, techniques have undergone many rounds of tweaks and iteration. In their original form, their effects were critical from fight to fight, needing to be coordinated and stacked to get a target into a state where the group could handle it in a reasonable amount of time. The repetitive nature of technique usage and the need of near voice comm levels of communication as applying techniques in the right sequence led players to burning out. I don't think I would agree with that. I don't think it was to that point. If it was, you're probably maybe a more casual player. That's fine, but I don't think the statement of needing voice comms to apply techniques is really, that seems a little drastic to me. For me, when I, even in a pug, like usually we would ask if anybody needed exposes or whatever state we needed to get certain debuffs up. And if they overlapped, one person would just decide to do it. I don't think you need voice comms for that, but I think that's a little bit of a drastic opinion on that one, but let me know what you think. I do think they were a little repetitive, but that's neither here nor there. As a result, we swung the pendulum to make techniques more optional, and as a result, largely overshadowed by class abilities, providing the same effect. While the reprieve from technique gate has been appreciated by many, it has left a feeling in our players that techniques are no longer living up to their potential. And I don't disagree with that. When they did the technique rework, as an example, I'll use Wizard as an example, we have a resist debuff that we can put up when a mob is exposed. This used to stack with Enchanter, and it's fine that they don't stack anymore. I don't really care about that. But the Enchanter, I think, brings 25 now, where the Wizards, which is still 2000 readiness, was knocked down to a mere 10. Even the Druid has a 20. So I'm kind of like, I'm not even sure why we have this ability, because I have so many other techniques that I utilize that are more valuable than that I don't ever use it anymore. I used to use it a ton before. Like if we didn't have an Enchanter or a Druid in the group, I would just pop it up. But I just don't feel like the amount of resist that ours gives now is even worth putting on the target, because I use my readiness for other abilities that I cast. So yeah, anyway, I'm glad they are redoing the technique system, but yeah, it's the way it is now. I feel like for certain classes, not having, as a wizard or any DPS caster, not having an Enchanter in the group is a direct DPS downgrade, unfortunately, because some druids don't like putting the buff up as it is. So I just use that as an example. I felt there was a little bit more flexibility with the old system, where more classes were able to put up debuffs that were meaningful. And that's, for me, I like that the community can work together to optimize their group. Doesn't feel like that as much now, outside of not having an Enchanter as a direct DPS downgrade for any caster DPS, really. But agree to disagree. Let me know what you think. We agree. Let's break the updates coming to techniques in the spring. Beyond the basic damaging techniques players start with, they will have the opportunity to learn more varieties and stronger techniques as they advance their skill in specific weapon types. Techniques will no longer be granted automatically when reaching the required skill. Instead, you will be prompted when you have reached the skill to learn something new. At this point, you will have to seek out trainers in the world and prove to them you are ready to learn the techniques they teach. I think this is an interesting way to do it, and I don't disagree. I always thought just auto-granting them was a little fluffy and unmeaningful. And they also didn't have their levels attached to the technique. So as time went on, if someone was asking about a technique, it was kind of hard to tell them what level you got it at, because it doesn't tell you in the spell book, and I'd kind of have to go online and look. But so I don't have an issue with that. I think that adds a little bit of extra flair to the game. Now, what you have to do to prove to them that you're ready to learn the technique is another side of the story. We'll have to wait and see what that means. Techniques are going to be grouped into 3 different categories: damage, reactive, and utility. Additionally, we are reducing the technique slots for all characters to 3. Each slot will correspond to a specific category of technique, meaning at any one time you can have 1 damage technique, 1 reactive technique, and 1 utility technique slotted. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing. The only concern I have with this is from a wizard. Again, I play a wizard, so I use that as a reference a lot of time because that's what I have the most experience with. We have a technique that I put up on every target that I engage, which, depending on what the main element that I'm casting is. So right now I would put up, it's not electrify, it's not fire. It's the one that increases the shock damage. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but that's neither here nor there. But I put that on every target. So that, I'm assuming that would be our reactive technique, I think. I looked through my techniques and I couldn't really I assume it's reactive because I'm reacting. There's a target in camp, so I'm putting the buff up, and it's only really for me, or I think other wizards would benefit because they don't stack. So damage technique, I have 1 damage technique unless they add more, which maybe they will, but as of right now I only have 1 damage technique. Utility technique, I'm assuming is going to be debuffs on the target. Excuse me. So I can only assume that's how they'll be broken up, unless they add more techniques, which is possible. Maybe they completely change the techniques we have. I can't really say for now. So it is an interesting way to do it. What I was just saying for the reactive technique, though, like, so we have a technique for each element as a wizard. So 1 for that buffs fire, 1 that buffs cold, 1 that buffs shock. Right now, there isn't really any incentive to weave our spells. So most wizards are probably using either cold or shock. I haven't found any that are really utilizing fire, just because the cast times are so long that it's not really advantageous to use that element right now. But so if I was weaving, I would right now, as it stands, I could potentially put up 2 debuffs, 1 that buffs cold and 1 that buffs shock. With this change, that won't be possible. And maybe that's what they're going for. I don't know. I don't know how the other class techniques work per se. I don't know if they have overlapping like reactive type techniques. I assume they're going to add more to these, it sounds like, and that's fine. Let's see. This is the reactive techniques are important as they represent the final form of how techniques will be used as a tactical component of combat. Let's break it down. Maybe this will tell us more. Obviously it will. Okay. And the first iteration of techniques, they were used primarily to counter the inflated stats of Chevron in PCs in order to reduce the enemy's armor resistance, its outgoing damage, etc. Techniques had to be stacked and coordinated in such a way to reduce all of these stats to a point where the group could survive and take down the target in a reasonable time. I think that's a little bit of exaggeratory to survive. You don't need to have that. It's nice to have. It makes stuff die faster or your tank take less damage, etc. But I don't think it's really to the point where if you didn't have it, you're just going to wipe. But on a raid target, maybe more so than a group target. But coming with the spring update, we will be heavily updating the NPC trait system and altering the way many NPCs traits will function. Instead of the armor trait being a permanent passive trait the NPC spawns with, the armor trait will now give that NPC a chance to armor up during combat, drastically increasing their armor class for a period of time. Without an answer to this, your group will need to slog through the extra defense and eat the increased time to kill. But if you or someone in your group has learned one of the techniques designed to counter and break through the effects of the armor trait, you have an answer indeed. We plan to I can't even pronounce that. We have a plan to extrapolate, don't ask, out this approach to how various techniques will now be used to counter specific NPC traits. Giving your choice of weapon and the techniques you have learned, the tactical and preparatory layer to combat we have wanted from the beginning. So it sounds like it would be, instead of putting an expose up and putting an armor debuff on the NPC, it sounds like they want you to react to that trait. So midway through the fight, the NPC puts up armor trait or resist trait or whatever other trait it could be, and it will be beneficial to the group to be able to counter that and put a debuff at that time to break through it. So instead of just putting it up at the beginning of the fight, you'll put it up when the buff goes up on the target. I don't necessarily have an issue with this way. My only question is, what is to prevent you from just putting it up from the beginning? If you put it up from the beginning, will it not break the effect? Like, will it not just have any effect when the NPC casts it? Like, what, I mean, does it only last an X amount of time? Are they reducing the time these debuffs stay on the target? So I have a few questions about that one. In theory, I think that's a good thing because it's more reactive. It makes you think about it more than just mindlessly putting up debuffs at the beginning of a target and then just pewing. So I don't necessarily have an issue with it. I just have some questions about how it will work. At the highest level of weapon skill, you will be able to unlock a master technique for the specific type of weapon. Mastering a weapon type and learning this capstone technique will not be quick or easy, but if you do, you'll have access to a special ability that signifies your status as a master of that weapon type. Again, they keep talking about weapons, but how does this translate to casters? Like, am I going to have to level up a weapon as a caster now? Like, that's going to be a more daunting task as a caster than it is as a melee, because I don't melee in combat. So I would basically have to go sit on a test dummy to level up this skill if that's what the expectation is. I do have an issue with that because that is mindless work. That's unnecessary. I hope that they will tie that to caster skills, which would be conjuration or evocation or whatever the particular skill is. But they keep referencing weapon skills, so that just worries me a bit from a caster perspective. We shall see. These updates to skills and techniques and the introduction of the mastery system are expected to add robust progression paths and uniqueness to different players who choose the same class. It will be exciting to see one Dire Lord focus on mastering the Great Sword, while another Dire Lord is dedicated to dual-wielding axes. That's all fine and dandy. I like that. But at the end of the day, like we've seen in other games, you can add all this extra, but whatever path gives you the best at what your class is expected to do, whether it be tanking, DPS, healing, CC, whatever, I would say 9 times out of 10, there's going to be somebody that specializes in that class, and they're going to make a video and they're going to say, I've done my research, I've tested these builds out. This is the one that seems to get you the best bang for your buck, or the most defensives, the most damage, the most healing. So we've seen that WoW, I just use WoW as a reference. There's other games that do this where they have separate paths that you can take. But at the end of the day, you tend to lean into a specific path because that's what's going to give you the best at your particular role. It is what it is. That's just the nature of games these days, and I don't see it changing, but maybe I'll be wrong. What do you guys think? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. In our next developer diary coming Wednesday, we will be talking about the Adventuring Mastery system and how it will dramatically change the character progression experience within Pantheon. I think probably everybody in the game is waiting for the Mastery system update, mostly because I think this is what's going to add more flexibility. It's going to power up the classes. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. When I think of the mastery system, being an old school EQ player, I always go back to the advanced ability system where that gave you opportunities to improve your casting or your melee or your mana regen or your damage output in certain elements or whatever, depending on the class you played. So I think that that'll be where the game starts getting a little bit more, a little bit more unique. How the mastery works will determine how unique, because they did focus a bit on if you're mastering in a greatsword, while someone else masters in dual wielding axes, as an example. So it'll be interesting to see how the mastery system works out, because I know Joppa had kind of alluded before about wizard maybe having areas of the mastery tree where you can choose to focus on fire or cold or shock damage. So, I mean, that could change the wizard play. But again, whichever one gives you the most output and sustainability, particularly on longer fights, is probably where most people are going to lean into. But again, time will tell. We will see if history repeats itself, because that's typically how stuff tends to go. But that is it for today's update. I hope you enjoyed all the feedback. If you disagree, agree, let me know in the comments. It's not going to hurt my feelings if you don't agree. Yeah, as always, like the video and subscribe to my channel if this was helpful for you, and we will see you in the next update. Bye.